On today's episode of the Going Commando podcast. It's been a while, and we are going to catch y'all up on what's happened in this exciting season of Commanders football. We're going to talk about some of the new additions to the team. We're going to take a look at the road ahead on this team's path to the playoffs and give some commentary about the last game and games to come. So stick around, stay tuned, and let's get the show started. Welcome to Going Commando, a Washington Commanders podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Going Commando podcast. My name is Clark alongside my co-hosts Tom and Chris, and it's been a minute since you've heard from us. Obviously, a couple month hiatus, and a lot has happened with this Washington Commanders team. When we last spoke, the Commanders were sitting at 3-1, coming off a big win over the Arizona Cardinals, and since then, obviously, a lot has taken place this year. We sit at 9-5, coming off of a narrow victory over the Saints, which we will get into. But gentlemen, it's great to be back, talking some ball with you guys, and we got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely, Clark. And I think the biggest thing with this entire hiatus as a whole is just how stellar this team has been. I mean, we've been watching what has been a contending team all year. This is something that we haven't been used to since, heck, I don't even remember how long ago. So it's just one of those things where we might have gotten a little bit lost in the sauce with all the wins, but we're back now, and boy, are we happy to be.
Yeah, it definitely feels good to be in the mix for once. The Commanders right now sit currently holding a wild card playoff spot, which, again, usually around this time of year, we're already looking towards the draft and, next year and what off-season moves are we going to make, right? So the fact that we're still here, even able to talk about meaningful football at this point in the season is just a breath of fresh air. And yeah, we've seen a lot of things really come out around this team. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses, or what can we at least continue to work on and get better at? So I think you've seen the team mature as well and grow a lot over the course of the season and continue to get better. We've played some tough teams and had some really close games, and some luck has definitely swung our way in a few instances as well. But overall, very pleased with how things have been going.
Yeah, so let's start there, actually, talking about kind of some adversity that this team has faced. I mean, we are currently riding a 2-game winning streak after, you know, taking care of business against the Titans, and then that narrow win over the Saints that really maybe wasn't the best indication of this team for the weeks to come. But we hit that 3-game skid. We were at 7-2 after the Giants game, the second Giants game, that is. And then you face the Steelers, Cowboys, two tough games, and then or Steelers, Eagles, two tough games, and then that loss to the Cowboys that really was one of the crazier games we've seen. A lot of people maybe were starting to write us off, saying that we had played an easy schedule. We weren't for real. Obviously, the Eagles have taken the front seat in the division, but you did say it. For once, we are not on the in the hunt graphic, and we are in a wild card spot. We can actually even clinch as soon as this weekend, although a lot of things would have to go our way, and I'm not sure that they will. But after that 3-game skid, to be able to take 2 games and looked like we were taking care of business against the Saints for a while there, although it was close in the end. How do you think this team responded after maybe facing some their first adversity really of the year?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll start. I think that this was a really impactful year for this team. I mean, especially in terms of growth. You had a lot of guys coming over who were trying to make a name for themselves. Obviously, we weren't as bullish on the prospects of this team being as good as they have been, and I think that was maybe a little bit short-sighted in our part. But also, we came into a season with a rookie QB, and we didn't realize necessarily what we had until that guy got on the field. And I mean, he's been lights out ever since. Jaden Daniels has been one of the better rookie quarterbacks in the league, if not the best for sure. And he's certainly been the best rookie quarterback I can remember in my lifetime since RG3. So, this season as a whole is basically defined on how far Jaden takes us into the playoffs, and how much that means for our future success will be shown, in the next few games. But obviously, he needs to sort of win out here to some degree if we are going to be looking at making a serious playoff push.
Yeah, I mean, I think the playoff push here is even just icing on the cake still for me at this point. It's just a breath of fresh air to have a competitive season. But we have faced some adversity, as you mentioned, Clark. There's been some key injuries that this team has picked up along the way. Guys like Jonathan Allen, who's been actually, out for most of the season. You lost Austin Eckler, likely, won't come back in much capacity unless there is a deep postseason run. Noah Brown again, not a name that maybe at the start of the season we thought we'd be talking about as much as we have been, right? But that was another guy who was a major contributor for us in this offense that is out for the season. We just lost Zach Ertz as well, possibly for a bit of time, if not the rest of the season as well. So, again, definitely faced some injuries here and there. I mean, but however, knowing Redskins Commanders history, we've faced far worse actually as it relates to injury bugs too. So, but to that end, adversity is no stranger to this fan base and to the foundation of this team. So, I've been pleased with how we've risen to the occasion and had that next man up mentality really when it comes to the guys on this roster.
Absolutely. And I'd like to add on to that, Chris. You make a good point about some of our best guys on this team. I mean, at least most experienced in some senses. Jonathan Allen, a guy that's literally played on this defensive line since what, 2016? And then you have a guy like Austin Eckler who's been on the field for, at least, a similar amount of time at this point. So two very strong contributing veterans, go out for us, and we still seem like we're a team that can sort of contend for at least some sort of playoff berth. So I think that's really more of a compliment to the roster building this year. And you make a great point about guys like Noah Brown, the guys who you don't necessarily expect to pop off and have these sort of great years, but of course when they inevitably do, you are nonetheless happy about it as a fan.
Yeah, and the injury bug, it's hit in multiple ways. Particularly with one of the biggest acquisitions that we've had, I feel like in a couple of years mid-season was the trade for Marshawn Lattimore from New Orleans. We traded for him, and this guy didn't play for us for about a month after acquiring him. He finally got in the Saints game and was outstanding. He wasn't targeted the entire game. Um, and when we're playing these bigger teams like the Eagles, or if we make the playoffs, whoever that might be, that's gonna just be you can't understate how important his presence is going to be in those situations. We saw, the weakest link of this defense being the secondary, and obviously St. Juice played about 3 snaps on Sunday against the Saints and managed to mess some stuff up in all of those snaps. So yeah, going back to that Saints game, it was great to see Lattimore. The offense, I think, did its job until there was a couple of miscues, like a couple of missed throws to Terry that, are a couple inches one way or the other that, were blowing that team out by 2 or 3 scores. Um, so despite the fact that it was a close game in the end, um, I don't think that we should worry about that performance. But what do you guys think? Do you guys think that is there anything to take away from this game against the Saints? Um, positive and negative moving forward.
I mean, yeah, I think the first thing that I would take away from the Saints game is, one, we were able to sort of come out and have that strong offensive burst that we had for the previous games, but it didn't necessarily carry, and we kind of saw that here in the Saints game. Um, but I think one of the biggest changes, which I think was positive, is that for most of that game, I mean, we held that team to not too many points, and sort of for them to come back in the end and almost beat us. I mean, it is obviously a bit disappointing as a fan, but for the most part, I mean, we played 3 quarters of great football, and I think if we can reproduce that, you know, at least, one time in the playoffs, we should be able to get a win out of it. But that fourth quarter, man, it can be a real witching hour for some of these teams that might not be too serious. And we saw the Commanders tested this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I noticed from that game as well was just the absence of Tyler Biotish being felt maybe more than we would have expected, right? I mean, I thought they granted the Saints do have a good defensive line and players on that end of the field, um, but they were getting a lot of pressure. I think we gave up. I don't know exactly how many sacks we gave up. We gave up a lot of what felt like a lot of sacks, and Jaden was getting a lot of pressure. So. I'm not sure if that's a testament to how cohesive the unit plays with Biotish at center, or just to the fact that that we've been pretty pleased, I think, overall with how the O line has played so far this season. I think some of their flaws are masked by Jaden's athleticism and his ability to kind of get out of situations and scramble. So I think that's still like an area that needs a lot of attention for this team moving forward. I don't. It's definitely not, again, not the worst we've ever seen by any means at all. It's better than any line we've probably had over the entire Rivera era. But still, work to be done there. And I think the other thing I noticed at that game was, again, just obviously the stat sheet having zeros next to Marshawn Lattimore's name, signaling really, that teams, especially his former team, were afraid to kind of throw to him or give him a chance to make a play, right? I don't think that spells good for St. Juice and some of these other corners on the back end of the roster for next year. I think that's another position they're going to continue to build on, but I really like what we have there. Haven't seen enough of Lattimore myself, wearing the burgundy and gold, of course, to have a true opinion on that, how successful of a trade that has or has not been. But I think, so far, so good. I know he took him a little bit of time to get healthy, and really it's more so a move for the long term than it is this season, even, I would say. Obviously, Mike Sanders still another guy, though, that we've been so blown away with his play as a rookie this season. And, he had a pick in the game, and he's just continued to look better and better as the season goes on. So I expect to see, obviously, Mike Sanders still back next year, Lattimore as well. And I actually think that you'll probably see Igbenogany back as well. I think he's a guy that this staff likes in that kind of reserve corner role. You see him on the field still a decent bit. Especially over St. Juice, you see Igbenogany on the field, at least with the staff, right? So again, I think those were my two primary takeaways from that game. And yeah, overall, like, the way that game, we were dominating that game. I'd say overall, the way that game ended, could have easily really fumbled the bag there. But just thankful that even despite the little time clock snafu, that again is out of our control, that happened at the end, we still were able to win it.
I think as well, some of your points there bring up something else that I wanted to talk about, which was kind of just the roster construction and the carryover from guys from old regime to new regime. A lot of those guys that you talked about that are so important, like the signing of Biotish has been really great to help bolster the offensive line. Igbenogany has been a very pleasant surprise. He was a guy that we had zero expectations coming into the season for, and he's actually Pro Football Focus, and you look at all those advanced metrics, he's actually been one of the top guys in the league. Obviously, sample size, but he's been very good for us. And that also makes you think, we cut Emmanuel Forbes in his second season with the team. Jamin Davis was gotten rid of. All of the first round picks from the Rivera era are gone. And in the offseason, I think you might see even more of a purging of some of those guys. I mean, there's only a handful of guys that are really you can call cornerstones that are from the previous regime. Terry McLaurin, Sam Cosme, Payne, Allen, who we mentioned is injured, but they are opening his 21-day practice window, which gives him an opportunity to potentially return if he can make it there. But just this roster, I know we talked about it in the offseason and earlier episodes. Um, I think it's been a brilliant job to be able to put together this roster that's been able to compete and be an above average team and with a chance to make the playoffs, all the while maintaining a lot of cap flexibility, especially considering we have a franchise quarterback who's going to be on a rookie deal in the coming years.
Yeah, we truly are balling on a budget, and in a good way. There's a lot of room for this team to make moves this offseason as well, on top of obviously the draft. And I think we've been very pleased so far with what we've seen out of the first Adam Peters and DQ draft class, right? So overall, very excited for what's to come. Obviously, I find myself thinking ahead. We still have a lot to go this season as well. So, happy to talk about what we think is going to happen over these next several weeks here as we wrap the season up. And again, I know we touched on it a little bit earlier. Look to the postseason and hopefully clinching a spot here over the next couple weeks if we can pick up some key wins. How are you all feeling about, I guess, the Eagles game in particular? I know Clark and I will actually be there live in support of our worthy Commanders. But how are we feeling about this kind of down stretch of the season here?
Yeah, so I mean, me and Clark talked about this, sort of off podcast a little bit, but this is really, this is a make or break final 3 games for us. The way that Clark and I both see it, and Chris, I'm sure that you would kind of agree with it. Going into this Saints game, we kind of felt like, for us to be comfortable about our position in the playoffs, we need to go 3-1. The Saints game felt like it should have been a win, and it was, but barely. The Eagles game, I mean, that seems like a team that is a bit of a world beater right now. I'm not necessarily sure whether we can compete at the same level, especially when you just consider the amount of, Hall of Fame to All Pro to Pro Bowl talent that these guys have. So you kind of write that one off. But then you finish with the Falcons and the Cowboys, and I think this is a Falcons team that's been in a bit of a state of flux. They certainly have a lot of talent on the roster. Quarterback play has been a bit of an issue for this team going into this next game. They're going to be starting Michael Penix Jr., so the rookie who was out of the University of Washington. So it'll just be interesting to see how everything sort of shakes out here. But we certainly need to get a big win over the Eagles this week if we want to have any chance of sort of breaking into that fifth seed, that sort of glory land where we don't have to play either the Lions or the Eagles in the first round.
Yeah, I think the fifth seed is unfortunately probably out of reach just because of the Vikings and the Lions both being 2 lost teams. But in theory, we could still get to that sixth seed. I was really pulling for Seattle the other night to beat Green Bay because we actually would have gotten that tiebreaker over them being that sixth spot. But then again, this is uncharted waters for us, and I'm going to take whatever we can get in terms of a playoff position because it just happens so rarely for us. Um, but yeah, the Eagles game, you look back at when we played them on Thursday last month, and we were winning at halftime of that game. Um, the Eagles are prone to having some slower starts, and they have a talented defense, but we've played them once already, and it kind of just came down to was Saquon Barkley in that second half, just our inability to stop the run. And I think this defense is in a better place now than it was then. Um, based off of the last couple of weeks. So I wouldn't entirely count us out. Obviously, we're not going to be favored in this matchup, but really, if we can just maintain some offensive consistency, if we can have a first half like we had at New Orleans, or really have Jaden move the ball. I think Jaden's worst game of the season was probably that Eagles game. So, uh, I'd like to think that he's gonna not play as I want to say poorly, but improve his play a little bit in that game. Um, and the Falcons, man, that scares me a little bit. We have yet to see Penix play, um, but they made the switch. And if they're making a switch from Kirk Cousins, he was in a bit of a lull, but obviously that's a proven guy. Um, they drafted Penix in the first round for a reason. So it'll be interesting to see. They're kind of having a little bit of a layup playing the Giants this week for Penix's first start, and then obviously that game was flexed to Sunday. So that Falcons game I think is turning out to be it's going to end up being a huge game, bigger than maybe we would have thought a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, and I mean, Clark, you make one big point there. I mean, they've sort of set us up here for what could be a playoff clinching game, I believe, against the Falcons. Because I do believe if we win that, we are officially in the playoffs. I'm not 100% sure on that. But you flex this into Sunday night prime time. You expect Kirk Cousins to play against his old team. You expect it to be for, the playoffs, and then we kind of have this snafu within the Falcons organization where they move on from Kirk Cousins, obviously having a stretch of bad games. Um, but it is a new league, and it's like sort of been a bit more defensively prominent, especially when you consider a team like the Chiefs having such a mediocre offense this year. So I think that this whole situation was set up for us to either, sort of shine in the spotlight or wither away into obscurity until next season. And I think, if you're a Commanders fan, you're keeping a close eye on this Commanders Falcons game, week 16, 17, 17.
17, right? Yeah, no, definitely. I agree. As for the game coming up this weekend with against the Eagles, I mean, I think the key is Saquon. Containing Saquon. Can we stop the run? That's something that I would say our defense has struggled against in some games this year. Is allowing guys to cut up and jump for big runs, right? So and Saquon's obviously having a tremendous year. So if we can cap that in any capacity, that's our ticket to winning. And I also think Marshawn Lattimore could be an X factor here. Again, we really just haven't seen enough. Teams haven't tested him. I'll be interested to see if the Eagles are willing to test him. I'd imagine he'll be paired up against uh, AJ Brown, and most of the time, or if not, some of their other top guys that they got over there, like Smith or whatnot. But I'd be just curious to see if he's a factor in this game or a non-factor, at like he was in a good way, right, last game. So yeah, I think it's just that we've got some different cards, things up our sleeve since we first saw this team earlier in the season. So overall, I think it'll be interesting. I think it on paper it's our toughest game of the season left at this point. However, it's always a dogfight with us in Dallas too. So by no means is this stretch going to be an easy one or a layup.
The thought has crept in my mind of a Commanders versus Cowboys Week 18 game in which it is win and in. I don't want to say that at this moment. Hopefully, we can take care of business. I do know that one potential road for us is as follows. All we would have to do is win one of the final three games. And between the Rams and the Seahawks, if there's one additional loss between those teams outside of the game that they play against each other, one of those teams would be 10-7. The other one would win their division. We would lock it up. We would lock up the 7 seed. So that's probably the easiest scenario. Um, I know Seattle plays Minnesota this upcoming week, which is definitely a game which Minnesota will be favored. So if we can take care of business in one of these final three games, Seattle loses that and they lose to the Rams, we would be clinching a playoff spot. So, you know, obviously strive for as high as we can get, but that's just one scenario I've seen.
Yeah, I'll be excited to see what happens Sunday with Clark and I in attendance cheering on our Commanders. So we'll give it our best. But really, I think to wrap us up here, curious, just I know we've talked a lot about this roster, especially early on in the season as well. Like some head scratchers, or so what we thought could have been head scratchers, but have actually turned out to be pretty solid contributors for us. Both through free agency and the draft, right? And so some things we expected, some things we didn't. So curious to hear who y'all think, if you had to pick one person or one addition rather, whether that's through the draft or free agency, I would say other than Jaden Daniels, which would be an obvious pick, I think, for all of us across the board here. But who has really stood out to you and is someone that you're excited for and either know is going to excited to see next year or would like to see back next year? I mean, I'll start us off. I for one have been super, super impressed with Frankie Louvu. He was one of the few guys I know that Adam Peters and company did give a multi-year deal to in free agency. But again, I really just didn't really know what I was getting when we signed Frankie Luvu. I'd heard good things about his time in Carolina, and obviously with the complimentary addition of Bobby Wagner on a 1 year deal to shore up the linebacking core. But I would love to have Wagner back for as long as he would like to stay. Trust me, he's been a great contributor and obviously an immense leader in that locker room, both sides of the ball. Just having a guy like that around. But regardless of if Wagner's here or not, I think Frankie Luvu is a future leader, already a leader, but a future key leader on this defense and this team. He plays with a ferocious style, something that we really have lacked at that linebacker position. He's able to line up, at your typical, 5 yard drop as a linebacker. He's lined up on the line. He's able to rush the passer. He's got 6 or 7 plus sacks. I think maybe not quite that. I actually don't know on the year, but he's got a bunch for the position that he plays. We already have him locked up for 2 more years on a not a cheap, but not an exorbitant deal by any means at all. And again, just really, really pleased with just the tenacity and hard-nosed energy that he plays with, and guys rally around that clearly. He knows what he's doing on the field, and he's playing with a purpose. And again, that's just something we've lacked at that position for years and years and years, and it's finally being prioritized and shored up nicely. So I would say that I would pick that guy as a guy who's just really stood out to me in terms of just the productivity we've gotten out of them and being not their first year on the team.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Frankie Louvu has been a very important piece of this team. Don't get me wrong, but I think for me, I'm going to kind of go with a bit of a head scratcher pick here for some, but for those who have been watching, they really do know how much of an addition this guy has been and will be for the upcoming future. But Ben Sinnott, I mean, this guy, we talked about the chances of him sort of changing this tight end room, and I think we were, a little bit surprised at how well Zach Ertz has played, and Ben Sinnott has been able to sort of fill into that 2 role very well. He looks like a guy that can play sort of both blocking and receiving, sort of that the Swiss Army knife tight end that we've been looking for a while, especially, considering what we've said about this tight end room in the past. And this is a room which I think is on the rise, and Zach Ertz has been playing well, obviously very old, but he's been able to mentor these guys like Ben Sinnott and John Bates and some of the other guys that have been in the room. And I think of this really paying off for us in a way that has been positive. And I think I would not be surprised to see Ben Sinnott sort of being discussed and sort of maybe even, the mid-season Pro Bowl talk in 3 to 4 years. When he's given a little bit more time to show off what he's able to do. So I've just been really impressed by him. I think he's had, maybe an underrated season. Not all of his contributions on the field really show in the box score, but Ben Sinnott would be my one addition that I've really been happy about this year.
Yeah, and I know we've talked a lot over the years about our tight end room, in the Rivera era. Um, Logan Thomas was just not getting it done. He wasn't much of a blocker, injury prone. Ertz has been a pleasant surprise. Not sure how much we were going to get out of him. He's been a pretty reliable target for your, young quarterback. But obviously he's not going to be around forever. And although Sinnott has had limited, you know, opportunities in the pass catching game, I like, what we've seen in some of the packages, and I think, he projects certainly well to maybe next year jumping into a starting tight end role. But for me, it's going back to the defense, and it's going back to one of the free agent signing, veteran guys we signed. Obviously, Luvu got a solid contract. Chin got a solid contract. Wagner was a big name. Dorrance Armstrong was a big name. But one of the under the radar guys was Dante Fowler Jr., who spent time with Quinn in Dallas and Atlanta. And he's having the best season of his career since 2019. At the end, when it's all said and done, could end up having better stats than that 2019 season when he was with the Rams. He's got 8.5 sacks to this point, which I believe leads the team, or maybe Luvu is right around there with 8 sacks. 31 tackles, 12 tackles for loss, the second most of his career, and he had that big pick 6 against the Panthers. He's just a guy that has really I've been impressed. Sometimes there's some penalties, maybe, I think there's a roughing the passer or two along the way, but he's kind of had a career, revival, so to speak. He wasn't really a starter, he was more of a rotational guy in Dallas, and here he's started some games, been, rotating in, but um, he's been a great pass rushing option for a team that traded its two star pass rushers last year. And to bring him in kind of at a cheaper price, I think his production and value there has been excellent. I wouldn't be upset to see him re-signed in the offseason.
Yeah, he looks better than I think anything I've ever seen out of Chase Young and maybe even Montez Sweat, and he's playing like, 2/3 of the snaps they were getting, if that. So completely agree. I hope Fowler's a guy they bring back. I mean, he was on a 1 year, I believe. So that's a guy that I really hope they're able to find a way to bring back, because I think other teams are going to be interested in a guy like that as well. Um, so be curious to see what happens there. There's a lot of guys that they signed on 1 year deals that I'm hoping they bring back, or we'll be curious to see if they bring back. Right? I think we talked about Igbenogany earlier. That's another guy on a 1 year. Um, Wagner, mentioned him, another guy on a 1 year as well. I think Chin's was I don't know. I think his was maybe a 2 or something. Um, but again, really, I'm not sure what Allegretti's was as well. I think his might have been more than a year as well. But again, there's just like a lot of guys that I want back.
Yeah, Chin looks like actually was a 1 year deal, only 4 million, which is pretty
Wow.
good value there. Um, but yeah, it's just you can't
Ertz was one
enough.
year.
Ertz is 1 year.
Eckler
Enough
only
can't be
2.
said. Allegretti was a 3 year, $16 million
Okay.
contract, which is pretty
It's pretty good
respectable as
value.
well for, a decent starting guard for us.
Eckler was 2 for 11, I believe. So it's like, again, we're spending, you see AP, making these deals, and he's spending 3, 4, 5, 6 million a year on these guys who are major, major, major contributors for our team. And you just don't see other teams making as savvy business moves. And that's why I'm so excited and have the confidence that I do have, which I've never had before, just in the back office kind of management of this team, because they just seem to be continuing to make good, conscious decisions.
It just goes to show you what competent ownership can do. It trickles down from the very top to the bottom. All the best organizations in the NFL are well run from the top to the bottom, and that's just not something that we had for, over 20 years in Washington. And it's certainly, if there's ever a time to be excited about the direction this team's going, it's now. And one thing I'm interested to see is, do they make a splash for a bigger, money guy? They have the ability to do so with all of our cap room. Um, this year was kind of the first rebuilding year. I think in a lot of ways it's similar to the Houston Texans last year. They came in with zero expectations, had a first top five pick quarterback in Stroud. They end up, having a great season. And then this past offseason, they brought in guys like a Stephon Diggs and Joe Mixon and Daniil Hunter on free agent deals. So is that a route we'll end up taking? It's to be seen, but opportunities are endless. And I think that this is going to be a place where free agents are going to want to come and play. All right, well, that's going to do it for this episode. Good to be back in the booth, talking shop, talking Washington Commanders. We certainly won't wait as long again. Obviously, life happens. People get busy. The team's playing good football, and you get all wrapped up in that excitement. Um, but nonetheless, we've had a great season. It's our first winning season since 2016, and it'll be great to see how the season finishes out. And you all will be hearing about it from the good folks at Going Commando. So for my co-hosts Tom and Chris, my name is Clark, and so long, HTTR and HTTC.